They just spent like 2 or 3 weeks out the country. Them boys up to something. They just Awesome. Well, welcome to Free Academy Live. My name is Jared Reyes, and this is Michael Fielding over here. This is actually the first edition. We're super excited to be with you guys. And today we're going to talk about this awesome documentary we saw, which is pirated on YouTube, so everyone can go and check it out. But it was originally an HBO documentary called the Newburgh Sting. So we're going to flash over to that and give you guys a quick intro right about now. So here's an intro, and basically the Newburgh Sting is about the FBI entrapping some people from Newburgh, New York, into committing to do a terrorist act, which of course they stopped before could ever happen, and basically about how they went on to find these people guilty. So they didn't actually get off because the court decided that it was an entrapment, and they actually ended up sentencing all the participants to, I think, 25 years of prison. But the fascinating documentary about how the FBI sets up people all the time to commit these terrorist acts that they then come in at the last second and prevent, so that they can go on convincing people that they're a necessary evil. And
all right, I'm back on. Let me turn the speaker off. Okay, I don't think I'm got that echo chamber anymore.
Now you're good.
Yeah, the Newburgh documentary was incredible just because it was only one example of this thing that happens all the time. The FBI will go around seeking out some of the poorest and stupidest people in the country and encourage them to carry out acts of terrorism. But they're never putting anyone in danger. They're giving them fake backpacks full of fake bombs, offering them $250,000 to go put it in a car outside, in this case, a
Jewish
mosque.
Temple?
No,
a temple? A Jewish temple.
Anyways, but the guys didn't even activate the fake bomb, so it was almost as if these guys never wanted to blow anything up. They just wanted the free money. And the FBI, of course, rushed in and arrested them all on the scene and took these 4 guys who they had spent a year trying to convince them to carry this out. And when they finally convinced them to do it, they rushed to the scene and prevent the fake terrorist attack so that the FBI can be on the news and parade around these bad Muslims. And really only one of them was kind of Muslim at best. And
yeah.
I don't know. What were your thoughts on it, Jared?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating story. To just go a little more in detail, there's an FBI informant who we find out later in the documentary gets paid $66,000 to go in. He goes into a mosque, and immediately the people who are members of the mosque can tell that there's something off about the way he's interacting. And but anyway, he goes there with the intention of finding people to convince them to join
This
in.
is the FBI informant who had got in trouble for a variety of things. I can't even remember, like embezzlement and stuff like that. So he was seeking a way out of getting in trouble himself, and then went on to find some fall men to get himself off the hook.
I mean, it's a crazy thing, because the documentary starts with some former FBI members are in the documentary, which is cool. So you get to see the agency's perspective, and they talk about post 9/11, that the FBI had such egg on its face about it that they were seeking to validate their presence, and so they were going out of their way to drum up terrorist activity that they could then solve for the purposes of being able to use that to make sure they continued getting funding, and to make sure that everyone still knew that the FBI was relevant in this big, necessary institution. So it was cool that they have some really high up former FBI officers that are in the documentary flat out saying the FBI needed to be on the news, needed positive publicity. But it was pretty sad.
the positive focus, I think, but also just the culture of fear that they were trying to instill. And they kept talking about you can't let the fear die down because then we lose funding. The
Yeah, like
FBI's funding is totally correlated with the amount of fear in the culture. So they like to have these, events from time to time where Americans are almost attacked, or even sometimes they are attacked, but they drum it up in order to escalate, ratchet up the fear in the society so that they can continue making money.
yeah, and I mean, if you think about it, you see it from each of the individual. You really get to a kind of a sneak peek at the FBI's motivation. You realize that their motivation, like every agency of government, is just to still exist and to grow, to get more funding, and you can just see it whenever they show clips of like the highest up person or whoever they choose to speak at congressional budget meetings, and how you can tell that they're just there to preserve themselves. What's good for the U.S. or the taxpayer doesn't factor in at all. They're clearly, just like every other form of government, their goal is to maintain power and ideally even grow. And you just see how cancerous that mindset is, even in the divisions of the U.S. government that are supposedly here to protect us, which I think are the divisions that might mean the most to American citizens when they try and contemplate why do we really need this big government. I feel like they think that ISIS and these things are such big threats that even if they can recognize the flaws in government from a service standpoint, they still think you need this big power to defend us. And I think, I don't know, just on a small scale, with the FBI, it shows how phony this need really is.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of the CPS, which we were talking about earlier, and how Child Protective Services, their entire funding scheme is based around this idea that they are protecting children from um, terrible parents, basically malevolence and all kinds of things. But I read this book, which I highly recommend, Legally Kidnapped by Carlos Morales, and he's a former CPS agent, and he talks about his history and how he went into it. Obviously, almost all CPS agents go into their field trying to help kids. They think of themselves as, the good guys in this fight against evil parents, basically. But the structure of the organization, and especially the incentive structure, encourages them to kidnap more children than need to be and actually cause more harm in society than even the abusive parents. He goes into some of the statistics about how even if you take a kid out of an abusive household and put him in a foster home, their life expectancy is shortened. Uh,
Real crazy.
and the vast majority of the kids who are getting kidnapped, it's because their parents smoked weed. It's not even like they're doing anything to the child, and they call that criminal negligence because they got caught with a illegal drug. But
It's crazy
if the
because those same
parents,
parents could have been peaceful alcoholics instead of peaceful marijuana users, and they would still have their child. But because it wasn't a peaceful version of the legal drug, they all of a sudden the kid's better off as an orphan in a foster family or something along those lines. It's crazy.
yeah, some of the other crazy things in there were about the medical testing they do on these kids, because they become wards of the state. So the government gets to decide what medication to give them. And first off, they get more money for every special needs child that they take. So there's this incentive to label more kids as special needs than actually need to be. Not to mention the fact that you're stressing them out like crazy because you just kidnap them from their parents.
Yeah.
And so obviously they're going to perform poorly on any kind of test you give them just because they've been ripped out of their environment. And so once they become wards of the state, the government has complete control to give them any kind of medication they want. And they've actually used some of these kids as test subjects, as guinea pigs for like AIDS treatment, HIV treatment. And he talked about how in the early 80s, some of that HIV tests weren't nearly as accurate as they are today. So a large portion of these kids who were tested, labeled as having HIV, and then given medication to try to cure their HIV, never even had HIV. Whenever they were getting tested with new drugs, nobody knew how any of the side effects, and these kids' lives were basically ruined because the government thought they needed to protect them from themselves and their own parents. So just an insane system, and especially when you get those structures, the incentive structures backwards, like with the FBI and the CPS, you just end up with bad outcomes.
Yeah, I think our you and I's perception of government, and well, there's a lot of angles to it, but one simple one is just that it ends up causing more problems than it fixes, and therefore it's incredibly hard to justify its existence. And then there's the whole other level of just the immorality when you try to get back to using the threat of violence for anything. But even if you could just say, okay, maybe the threat of violence is worth it if it creates more good than bad. But I think from both of our perspectives, we think it's wrong on both accounts.
Yeah, it seems like government is the cause of almost every problem they purportedly try to solve. And of course, that gets this feedback loop where they try to solve a problem, try to solve. Whether it's just incompetence or actually malice, we can disagree, and it's probably different for different people in the
I think it's
government.
probably always a combination.
Yeah, but either way, you get stuck in this trap where the government tries to fix something, they make it worse. Everyone yells, "Oh, government, come save us, please!" And then the government tries to fix it, they make it worse again, and
Well, it's
it's
like
just this terrible feedback loop
yeah.
where things get out of hand.
Well, they put a band-aid here. They want to solve this problem, so they put a band-aid there, which then somehow causes other issues, and then they got to duct tape that other issue, and then now that issue has all these ripple effects that were impossible to predict. All right, so then now they got to fix all those ripple effects, and it ends up being this, huge just duct tape structure that caused way more structural damage than it ever, I don't know, than just rebuilding and recognizing that it was flawed to begin with. But to
For
take it back
sure.
to the Sting.
Um, oh, back to Newburgh Sting. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a great film for everybody to watch because you
Yeah,
really start to empathize with these people who are paraded around in the news that as terrorists. They're they're actually labeled Muslim terrorists, even though only one of them was a little bit Muslim. Like he
yeah,
went into a mosque a few times, and that's it. And then the FBI informant encouraged him to seek out other Muslim brothers, but he really found a bunch of his poor neighbors who,
we're in it for
their eyes
fun.
got this big when they heard the number $250,000. And I think you can start to see how anyone in that situation might try to figure out a way to get the money, but without actually killing people, which is
Yeah,
kind of the vibe I got from almost all of them. Like the one guy, they
especially
even said he
David.
was almost mentally retarded.
Yeah,
And
and that was
the
government
other
record.
three were just poor guys from Newburgh, and like they just had no options in life. So they saw, wow, $250,000, I can change my life. Like, how can I get it, but without actually doing this terror plot? And in the end, they didn't even switch on the fake bomb. So, you know, I would guess assume that they just didn't actually want to carry out the attack.
Yeah, I mean, and this one of the saddest parts, even uh, for me, is even if you believe that they were willing to kill people for the money, like they got convinced to kill people for the money, if you still saw the way all the public officials were going on the news and the things they were saying, they were clearly lying on the news. Like they said, this was a Muslim extremist, and it makes it clear that at least two of them, weren't even Muslim. They flat out just wanted the money, or were tempted by the money. Then they go on and they constantly say that they met in prison and started orchestrating this in prison when none of those guys knew each other at all from any times in prison, and I think one of them had never even been to prison to begin with. It's like they can, even if you think they did something wrong, it's very clear that the government was willing to lie to the public just by listening to the press conferences because they don't they don't put forth any accurate information. They're clearly trying to paint a very specific picture of what these guys were up to, even if you can say they deserve some punishment because eventually they agreed to it. Even if you believe that, you still have to be frustrated by the inaccurate picture the government was painting for the purposes of fear and for the publicity that it would lead to for the FBI.
Yeah, absolutely. And just hearing from the families and the friends, and um, it was cool to see the other side of the story because the media, the newspapers, everything paints it as just evil terrorists. The plot was foiled by the FBI. Yay, they saved the day, and like now we can all sleep safe knowing the FBI is out there catching the bad guys right before they cause trouble. But in the end, they created all the trouble and then just stopped it, right? Just to get in the news and be labeled
Yeah.
as the good guys.
Well, and it goes on to give examples of other terrorists that they caught, like in the subsequent months. And what's also said is, I guess it demonstrates that I think that was the pivotal court case. The excuse me, I think that was the first one at post 9/11 that happened. And then when the courts came out and ruled that that wasn't entrapment, that that was the critical precedent that they needed to be set for them to continue doing this and continuing, to get away with it. You know what else is messed up is they say at the end they're sentenced for 25 years in prison, and they say at the end that that's the minimum given that a Stinger missile was involved. But if there was no Stinger missile, they could have been sentenced to a month in jail. There's no minimum. So the government intentionally came up with a plot that included a Stinger missile so they could convince some dumb poor people to get 25 years in prison. It wasn't even the publicity. They were willing to put these guys away for 25 years. All they had to do was do anything that they did and exclude the Stinger missile, and they had to know this,
Mm-hmm.
and it wouldn't have even. And then they made the guy cross state lines just so they can have a role, because if they didn't cross state lines with the weapons, then it's not a federal offense, and therefore the FBI can't be involved. So like they pulled so many tricks to have any jurisdiction over the case to begin with. Like it's so frustrating and sad. And to see, my favorite character is the bartender. There's a black bartender in there, or he's in a bar. I don't, maybe he owns it, maybe he's a bartender. I'm not sure. I think he has a Yankees cap on, and he talks about gangs at one point, and I just loved it because he's like, we're running around here, these little gangs, and people don't realize that the government comes in, ain't nothing but they're nothing but a gang themselves. You know, they're just on a
Yeah,
whole
he
nother
said
level.
compared to the little gangs that run around the streets.
Awesome, awesome, man.